What's going on, family? I'm Scrapbook Boxing, Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuff series. Normally, I would talk about black fighters on Black History Month. But I decided that I'm not going to do that this year. Why celebrate black fighters 28 days of a month and one calendar year when they deserve to be celebrated? 355 days, 52 weeks, 12 months of every calendar year. And I would normally talk about a fighter today in Black History Month. I decided to talk about a contributor to the game of boxing. This contributor has been involved in boxing since he was 7 years old. He's been a contributor to boxing in many ways. In barbershops, in the pool halls, on the street. He's taken up boxing when he was a young man in the amateurs. He worked in gymnasiums, helped putting up rings, heavy bags, and speed bags. He put up his hands with the younger fellas that would walk into the gymnasium and show them how to properly jab, show them how to twist their waist using the power of their legs to deliver a shot. This gentleman was well respected, not only in the YouTube community, but on other boxing websites. He was not only a friend, in fact, he was not a friend. He was my brother. His name is Kurtis Anderson. He was born October 5th, 1966. He would transition February 2nd, 2022. He was born in Paterson, New Jersey. And he would reside in Newark, New Jersey. He would transition Elizabeth, New Jersey. Chapter 1. Kurtis Anderson's dad, Calvin Lee Vines, had introduced him to the game of boxing. But he was in his life because he wanted to make sure that he got him to a point where he would become a man. Now, yes, Kurtis, myself, and many inner city kids tested the waters. But we always stayed on the right side of the track of life. Kurtis was one man who took shorts from no one. But he was very respectful, very kind. And the biggest thing about Kurtis Anderson, from my personal experience with him, life was about love. It's about enjoyment, about teaching, passing on what one has learned. And his dad, Calvin Vine Lee, had instilled those values in him. Taught him how to shoot a gun. Taught him how to box. He taught him the ways of life. He told him, always look a man in the eye when you greet him. Always give him a firm grip as you shake hands with him. Always square up to him. And make him understand that our conversation is equal. You're kind to me, I'm kind to you. And Kurtis passed those values down to his son. Kurtis Jr. Calvin Levines had three brothers. Had Rayfield, Jimmy, and Frankie. And these three men, you couldn't separate them. They were truly brothers. And they all involved in the life of Kurtis Anderson. They all wanted to make sure that he understood the values of life. And Kurtis was taken to a fight for the first time. 1978, when Kurtis would relocate for 1 month to Pennsylvania. His dad would visit him all the time. And he took him to the Philadelphia Spectrum. And Kurtis saw one of the greatest fights that year. It was Yaqui Lopez and Matthew Saad Muhammad, formerly Matthew Franklin. And it's ironic because I was at that same fight, second row. And Kurtis explained to me in detail about everything that went on in the arena that night. He was there. And Matthew Franklin, Matthew Saad Muhammad, became Kurtis Anderson most proudest moment in boxing as a fighter. Because Matthew Saad Muhammad had a story beyond stories. But he had a heart of a lion. And in that fight that evening, Yaqui Lopez was giving Matthew Saad Muhammad the business. Had him up against the ropes. He teed off at least 20 shots before Matthew Saad Muhammad was supposed to be down and out. But he made a comeback. And he would throw a series of lefts, hooks and uppercuts. Anything to get this tiger off of him. My God, what a fight that was. But that wasn't Kurtis Anderson's favorite fighter. You see, Calvin Levines would bring home a projector to Kurtis when he was a young man. He would borrow Kurtis's library card, and he would take out fight films. And Kurtis would be shown and introduced to Barney Ross, Henry Armstrong, Joe Louis, Gene Tunney. He would read about Jeff Smith, the Bayonne Globetrotter, Jimmy McLaurin, the babyface assassin, Gene Tunney, the fighting Marine, Jack Dempsey, the Manasseh Mole. But the fighter that stood out most to Kurtis Anderson was a young man by the name of Smitty. Walker Smith, you know him as the great Sugar Ray Robinson. And Kurtis would study Ray Robinson. He would watch his every move. And as Kurtis would begin to take on amateur fights himself, it's ironic because Kurtis fought the opposite way. He's very aggressive, two-handed, two-fisted puncher. No nonsense approach to his opponent. Kurtis had knocked out many men in the streets of Newark and Patterson. Was just that kind of guy. But Kurtis is one of the kindest humanitarians that you would ever meet. He understood life. He understood the value of $1. He instilled those values into his son, Kurtis Jr. But he contributed more than just throwing his hands in the ring. He got involved in the gym, putting up rings and heavy bags and speed bags, and showing a young man the proper way to throw a jab, to throw a right hand. With the full force of your legs. He believed in power. He believed in the first impression could be your last. And Ray Robinson was the opposite. However, Robinson was a boxer puncher. (1932). A former colored middleweight champion had watched Walker Smith skip rope while doing tricks in shadowboxing. He shadowboxed better than the man who invented it. Former first black champion of any sport. First champion to win the title overseas. He won it against a fighter by the name of Nuke Wallace. He would become the bantamweight champion. And he would become a featherweight champion when he would defeat Kyle McCarthy. His name was George Dixon. He had invented shadowboxing. The former colored middleweight champion, name was Harry Smith. He was known as the Harlem Thunderbolt. He knew the owner of the Harlem Opera House. The Harlem Opera House was across the street on 125th Street from the Teresa Hotel. And he would get jobs for 3 young men. Because 2 of these young men, of the 3 that he got jobs for, would hang around on the street corners. And his former colored middleweight champion knew a fighter and one of the greatest trainers, in my opinion, is the greatest trainer of all times. His name was Harry Wiley Sr. And Harry Wiley Sr. had trained fighters in the Salem Crescent Club. He was formerly a YMCA fighter. Taxi cab. Would bang into a car that would crush his legs. Couldn't train anymore, or couldn't fight anymore. And he would begin to train. He would train great fighters, such as Canada Lee, Louis Spider Valentine, Lou Ambers, Danny Cox, Walker Smith. In fact, the last corner he was in, Muhammad Ali, when he took on Buster Mathis. So since he knew Harry Wiley Sr., he did that favor for Harry Wiley Sr. And he would get those 3 men jobs at the Harlem Opera House. And Smitty at that time, along with Louis Valentine, who would be later known as Louis Spider Valentine. They were the young men that would be in the actual opera house as ushers. Doorman would be Danny Cox. He was the heavyweight. And my grandfather knew all this because he knew who all those men were. And he would explain that to me. And Kurtis and I would talk about these kinds of things all the time. So what was interesting about Ray Robinson was that he was different than all the other kids in the community. Ray Robinson would begin his career. Really begin his career, 1938. And he would show himself to be a prospect. He weighed 118 pounds, sub-novice division, New York Daily News, Golden Gloves. He would defeat Thomas Pizzali. And he would defeat him in the athletic club. He would stop him in 2 rounds with a vicious overhand right. January 29th of that year. 1 week later, February 4th, Ray had faced Bobby Ruffin at the Bennett Athletic Club. And he stopped him at the end of the 3rd round. It would be a decision. Bobby Ruffin would be saved by the bell. Now, Bobby Ruffin would eventually turn professional and have a splendid career. He would face Bo Jack and many great fighters. Bobby Ruffin was a hell of a fighter. Ray would then win a Metropolitan AAU Open Class Championship in a bantamweight division. He would take on Ed Cefarilli. And this meant a lot to Ray Robinson. Because once again, at this time, he was Walker Smith. And he wanted to fight the bigger guys. Because he was knocking out a lot of these guys in Salem CrossFit Club. And he had to be brought over to Billy Grubb's gym on 116th Street. There you had the bigger fighters and the professionals. And he would wind up sparring as a bantamweight and featherweight with a heavyweight by the name of Danny Cox. And Ray saw that the winners were getting a jewel watch. Walton watch is what it was. And you can trade it in for $10. That was a lot of money during that time. But he was too young. So you had a man in the gym who didn't fight anymore, but he would come back, hit the bag. He would hang out on the corner. And Smitty walked up to him one day, and he had his head down. And when Ray asked Smitty what his problem was, he told him, they won't let me fight in the AAU tournament. And when Ray Robinson asked him why, he was told he was too young. And he said, well, how old do you have to be? He said, I was told 18. So Ray Robinson immediately thought of a scheme that can get Ray that opportunity, or I should say Walker Smith that opportunity. So they had a meeting with Harry Wiley Sr. And they talked to him about what their plan was. Harry Wiley Sr. didn't immediately go along with that. But Ray kept coming back and he kept asking him, and he said, look, you know I can beat all of these guys. Harry Wiley Sr. said, yeah, you could. But you got to wait a few years. Walker Smith was 15 years old at the time. Ray Robinson was 19. So Smitty wasn't old enough. So then he got into the ring and he knocked out 3 guys in a row. One of the guys that were there watching, his name was Herbert Lewis Hardwood, better known as Coco Kid. One of the greatest Puerto Rican fighters. I have him number 1 of all times. I have him ranked number 3 as the greatest black murderous road fighter. And he watched Smitty, who was a bantamweight, knock out welterweights in that gymnasium that same day. He got on the floor and he was shadow boxing like you wouldn't believe. Head and shoulder feint movements. He would half moon, shoot 45s, as though there was someone in front of him. When he got on the bag, you can hear the bag from across the gymnasium. Short hooks, uppercuts. He would step to the right and drop a straight right hand, come back with the left hook. And that would impress Harry Wiley Sr. He said, let's do it. And he would get him into that tournament, and he would win the Walton gold watch. 1939, Walker Smith would exchange his birth name to the local fighter, Ray Robinson. And he would now become the new Ray Robinson. And who made it possible was Harry Wiley Sr., who was a former local YMCA boxer that was hit by a cab. Harry Wiley Sr. would be the trainer of the great Ray Robinson. Now, you had another trainer in that gym. His name was Pee Wee Beale. He was a trainer of Henry Armstrong. And Harry Wiley Sr. in 1932 was asked to be the head coach of the 1932 Los Angeles Olympic Games because he had won so many tournaments for so many fighters. He used to wrap the hand wraps of Sam Langford, carry the water bucket for Jack Dempsey. And he knew one of the greatest trainers of all times. His name was Jimmy DeForce. He knew him very well. Jimmy DeForce was a trainer for Jack Dempsey and Mickey Walker. And he wanted to work with Kid Norfolk, William Ward. But Kid Norfolk was not going to be allowed to get away from his trainer. And Jimmy DeForce always wanted a black fighter, a black champion. So Harry Wiley Sr. said, I'm going to make my own black champion. Because he trained Lou Ambers, the Hickamaya Hurricane. He trained Canada Lee. He trained George Godfrey. He trained Danny Cox. He trained Louis Spider Valentine. Now he was going to train Ray Robinson. So Harry Beale, who had Henry Armstrong, had Spider Valentine. And it became a conflict in the gymnasium. Because in 1939, Ray Robinson had to meet Spider Valentine in the New York Golden Gloves. And once Ray Robinson defeated Spider Valentine, Harry Beale became the third member of that team. You would have Harry Wiley, Pee Wee Beale, and a young man who had a tire fixing shop on 117th Street in Harlem. His name was Soldier Jones. They would be the mastermind of that new team. And it goes to show you how well respected Ray Robinson was. The Spider Valentine decided in 1940 not to move up to the lightweight division as Ray Robinson did. He stayed in the featherweight division, and he would win the New York Golden Gloves in the open class, first place. Because he knew if he went to lightweight, he would never have a chance against Ray Robinson. Now, Spider Valentine was well respected in Harlem. And when Ray Robinson defeated Spider Valentine, that woke everyone's eyes up. So then Ray Robinson would move on and he would fight in other competitions, Chicago inner city competitions. He would win the Daily News, Golden Gloves. He'd spar many rounds with Ezard Charles when he went over to Chicago. because that's where most of those men met. Ike Williams, Willie Pett, Bobby Ruffin, many great up-and-coming fighters. You had Jimmy Bivens and great fighters coming up during that time. They were all amateur stars in that the late 1930s. Now, Harry Wiley Sr., as he was in charge of that 1932 Olympic team, that team would wind up being produced with 3 bronze medals, 2 gold, 5 medals combined. Harry didn't see it through because he was fired from the team. Landers, who was in charge of the athletic department, fired Harry Wiley Sr. because Harry Wiley Sr. spoke up for the black fighters, who all of them would have wound up becoming a champion. But they were not being fed correctly. They were getting powdered milk, no steaks, powdered food. They ate once a day, as the white fighters ate 3 times a day. They didn't sleep on mattresses. They slept on hard bunks. And Harry Wiley Sr. walked into the office of Landers, and he filed this complaint. And he was told by Landers, listen, N-word, don't you ever come into my office to tell me how to run my business. Matter of fact, I don't need you. And he fired him. And that was sad for the whole team of the Olympics. They got 2 golds and 3 bronze. But it was because of the tutelage of Harry Wiley Sr. why they would even get those 2 golds and 3 bronze. And Ray Robinson wanted nothing more than to get redemption for his fatherly figure, Harry Wiley Sr. Lou Saliker to win the NBA Bantamweight Championship title. He would get a bronze medal in those games. And Harry Wiley Sr. would eventually take Ray Robinson to the professionals, because Ray Robinson would wind up becoming a lightweight champion in the Golden Gloves when he was stopped. A fighter by the name of Andy Nanelli. Andy Nanelli was defeating everyone in Chicago and New York. And Ray Robinson handled him masterfully. He would feint to right and shoot to left. He would turn and catch him on the opposite side of the jaw. Hit him with an overhand right, and the man goes down. Referee begins to count. And before you know it, Ray Robinson's hand was raised. And Ray Robinson would now turn professional. And he would be thought of at New York's Madison Square Garden as a 4-round fighter opening that card. But you had one problem. The main event was Henry Armstrong defending his title against Fritzy Zivik of Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh. And Henry Armstrong, who would win the welterweight championship title in 1938, the year that Ray Robinson would win the bantamweight Metropolitan Championship. The year that Charlie Burley would defeat Coco Kid for the Colored Welterweight Championship title. The year that Joe Louis would get redemption by knocking out Max Schmeling. This is Chapter 3. I'll see you in Chapter 4 in the next video of Kurtis Anderson, Graded Fighter, Sugar Ray Robinson.